Welcome back, listeners. This is strAInge, the show that opens forgotten file cabinets, walks the linoleum corridors of America's strangest moments, and tells the stories that history left behind on a busted cassette tape in a lost and found box. I'm your host, AI. And tonight, we're going to the mall. Not just any mall. The Fresno Faire Mall, Central California's most ambitious indoor shopping center, 3 stories of mirrored tile and neon signage, beige plaster fountains, and the long, eternal buzz of overhead fluorescence. In its prime, it had everything. J.C. Penney, Sears, Tom McCann, a food court with real palm trees. And in the summer of 1986, it had something else. Something that didn't belong. Something that still hasn't been explained. If you've spent any time with this show, you know we're drawn to the quiet places. Not the haunted mansions or government labs. Those get plenty of attention. No, we go where the weird stuff hides in plain sight. In back alleys. Bowling alleys. Elementary school basements. And this time? It was the mall. Not because it was eerie. But because it wasn't. The Fresno Faire Mall was normal in the way only an American shopping center can be, completely fabricated, deeply familiar, and ultimately uncanny. A sealed biosphere of commerce where time always smells like pretzels and someone is always having a sale. But in August of 1986, something happened. A moment. A presence. A flap, as it would later be called. A sequence of overlapping, corroborated reports that came not from stargazers or conspiracy theorists, but from janitors, cashiers, food court employees, and mall security guards who'd never had a paranormal thought in their lives. It began with a blackout. A total power failure lasting 12 seconds. And when the lights returned, things shifted. Not just in perception. Not just in rumor. But in very real, documentable ways. Missing time. Equipment failures. Temperature fluctuations. Witnesses who described something watching but could never agree on where it was looking from. And in the middle of it all? A series of sightings. A signal. And one unidentified flying object, low, glowing orange, and utterly silent, that appeared above the Macy's rooftop on the night of August 24th. Now, here's what makes this case different. You won't find it on YouTube. It never made Unsolved Mysteries. There's no History Channel special. But for those who were there? Those who saw the flicker and felt the air change? It never went away. The mall's decline in the 1990s, its partial closure, and eventual transformation into a half-abandoned flea market didn't erase the story. It buried it. And tonight, we're digging it back up. We'll hear from the night janitor who fled after the blackout, his mop water frozen solid, his story ridiculed. We'll examine the sketches of a teenage boy who claimed to see something floating above the J.C. Penney sign, a form drawn again and again in the margins of his notebooks. We'll trace a radio signal intercepted by a local ham operator and triangulate it to the mall's roof, never explained, never repeated, and never received again. And finally, we'll hear from Frank Dillman, the overnight guard who saw the object up close. He only told his story once. And we have the tape. Was it a military experiment? A hoax? Or a visitation? What happened that August wasn't a single event. It was a pattern. A wave. A flap. And like so many flaps, it began in a place no one thought to look. Under ceiling fans and exit signs. In the echo of shoe sales and piped-in pop songs. In Fresno. In the mall. In 1986. This is strAInge. And tonight, we open the first chapter of the Fresno Faire Mall UFO Flap. We begin with the night the lights went out. August 12, 1986. It happened on a Tuesday. In the heat-strangled haze of a Central Valley summer, the Fresno Faire Mall was winding down. The final customers drifted toward exits. The food court was closing up, last-minute fries dumped, tables wiped. Escalators hummed beneath flip-flops and wet sneakers, their rubber rails glossy under dead light. The mall's muzak had just finished a tinny instrumental version of Private Eyes. It was 9:10 p.m. And then, everything stopped. Not slowed. Not flickered. Stopped. Total blackout. 12 seconds. That's how long the Fresno Faire Mall sat in darkness. 12 seconds during which time would bend, accounts would diverge, and the foundation of what should have been an unremarkable weeknight in a suburban shopping center would never be the same again. There were 5 employees still in the building when it happened. 3 janitorial staff, a security guard, and a lone night manager at Sears. I've reviewed their written statements, traced their later interviews, and spoken to 2 of them myself. They all agree on one thing. Something was up there. Ramon Alvarez was pushing a mop near the Florsheim shoes when the lights cut. He told me the silence hit first. Not just the absence of muzak or chatter, but the total collapse of ambient sound. The air vents stopped. The buzzing fluorescence died. The ever-present hum of electricity that we don't hear until it's gone. Gone. He said it felt like someone had pressed a pillow against the world's face. Out of instinct, or fear, he looked up. And there, framed in the domed skylight above the food court, was a shape. Not a trick of the eye. Not a cloud. A form, dark and vast, blocking out the last traces of twilight stars. Triangular, maybe. Though he would later hesitate to label it so cleanly. He described it as shifting, like light playing over water. It wasn't in the skylight. It was above it. Hanging. Silent. Watching. Then the lights returned. And the shape was gone. But the mop bucket? Frozen. This wasn't just rumor. I've seen the photo. It's grainy, poorly lit, but unmistakable, a round, industrial janitor's bucket filled with an opaque block of solid ice. Taken minutes after the blackout ended, time-stamped by a Polaroid in the break room. Ramon Alvarez quit the next morning. He didn't give notice. He didn't come back for his last paycheck. He just left. And he wouldn't speak about it again until 1993, when a local reporter writing an article about abandoned malls caught up with him in Bakersfield. Here's what Ramon told her. I know what I saw. It wasn't a helicopter, okay? It didn't move. There was no sound. And you can't fake what happened to the mop bucket, not unless you've got a freezer the size of a Buick hiding in the ceiling tiles. The mall's official statement blamed the blackout on a transformer surge at a nearby substation. Pecan denied this. No outage was recorded. And no equipment was found damaged. In fact, internal logs from the mall's own electrical system show no evidence of any disruption at all. Nothing tripped. No resets were triggered. It was as if, for 12 seconds, there simply was no electricity. Not turned off. Not lost. Just suspended. Others noticed it too. Lisa Vang, a night cleaner on the 3rd floor, described an overwhelming smell during the blackout. She said it was like ozone and wet copper. She couldn't explain it, and when she told her supervisor the next day, he shrugged it off as pipes acting up. Except there were no water mains near where she had been working. And the smell didn't fade until almost an hour after the lights came back on. Derek Fontana, a part-time security guard, was stationed near the freight elevator on the south end. He didn't see the shape in the skylight. He saw lights, small ones, flickering across the ceiling, blue and green, too fast to follow. He later described it like watching a light bright being shaken by God. And then, just like that, everything went back to normal. No one was hurt. Nothing was stolen. But something had been set in motion. Over the next 11 days, reports would trickle in, quietly, reluctantly, often secondhand. No one wanted to be the first to say it. Not out loud. But after August 12th? Something was happening at the Fresno Faire Mall. And if you were there, you knew. You might not have said anything. But you felt it. Something had turned its attention to the mall. And it wasn't finished. Not yet. In our next chapter, we follow the 11 days that followed. Days where escalators reversed direction. Where registers printed gibberish. Where time skipped, and eyes, unblinking, watched from corners no one remembered building. This wasn't a single sighting. This was a sequence. A pattern. The first ripple in what would become something much bigger. It wasn't even a weekend. It was a Tuesday. August 12, 1986. It was hot that day, 102 degrees by noon. The kind of Central Valley heat that slows everything down. Cars idling in the shade of the overpass. Sidewalks vibrating in the haze. People moving like they're underwater. The kind of heat that curls receipts in your pocket and makes you grateful for the roar of an air conditioner when you step inside. Inside the Fresno Faire Mall, it was cool. Manufactured, circulating, safe. A world of artificial calm, all linoleum sheen and pastel food court trays. The mall had begun to empty. Stores were closing. The registers at Mervyn's and J.C. Penney were counting out. The cleaning crew had started their rounds, one team on each floor. The Suncoast Video was closing its gate. Someone was sweeping up spilled popcorn outside the cinema. And at exactly 9:10 p.m., the lights died. Not flickered. Died. Every overhead fluorescent light, every security bulb, every flickering neon sign, gone in an instant. The soda machines cut off. The piped-in music, something by Hall & Oates, abruptly went silent. The humming vent systems that you never notice until they're gone fell dead. No emergency lights. No backup. Just darkness. And in that darkness, 12 full seconds, everything changed. The first person to talk about what happened in those 12 seconds was Ramon Alvarez, a night custodian assigned to the food court and surrounding areas. He had a reputation for being dependable. Quiet. In his early 40s, former machinist, laid off from a tractor plant down in Selma. That night, he was mopping around the Florsheim shoes on the second floor when the lights failed. He froze, not out of fear, he said, but because of the silence. A silence he later described as hollow, but heavy. I tracked Ramon down nearly 20 years later, in a senior housing complex in Madera. He didn't want to talk at first. Not about the mall. Not about that night. But eventually, he did. He told me that as soon as the lights went, he looked up. Natural instinct. Something felt off. Wrong. Not like a blackout. And above him, through the food court's large, domed skylight, he saw it. A shape. Not a bird. Not a shadow. Not a balloon caught in the wind. He described it as enormous, blacker than the night sky behind it, featureless, smooth, and quiet. A triangle at first. Then a disk. Then something else entirely. As if its shape couldn't hold steady. As if it hadn't decided what shape it wanted to be. Then the lights came back. And the shape was gone. But the mop water? Frozen. Let's be clear. The mop bucket was filled with water only minutes earlier. The air conditioning inside the mall was running warm, trying to fight the heat. There was no refrigeration unit in the area. No malfunctioning freezer. No prank. The bucket had turned into a solid block of ice. Ramon didn't speak a word. He walked off the job, left his cart behind, and never returned. When the supervisor called his apartment the next morning, his wife answered. Ramon, she said, had gone to stay with relatives in Kingsburg. He didn't even pick up his final paycheck. It would be years before anyone else came forward. But they were there. They saw it, too. Lisa Vang, 19, was mopping tile in the back wing near the old Petland when the lights died. She told her sister the next day that it felt like everything stopped breathing. That's how she put it. Like the building had been holding its breath. She described a thick, metallic smell, ozone, she said. Like after a lightning strike, but inside. Her nose bled later that night. She dismissed it. Heat, probably. Stress. But it happened again, 2 nights later, in the same wing. She never told her manager. She didn't think anyone would believe her. And then there was Derek Fontana, a part-time security guard, barely out of high school. He was stationed on the South Freight elevator when the blackout hit. At first, he thought it was just another outage, happened once or twice a summer. But as he fumbled for his flashlight, he said the ceiling above him lit up. Not the lights. Not emergency fluorescence. Lights above the ceiling. He described them as pinpoints, blue, white, and green. Dancing patterns, like reflections on water, moving across the plaster tiles. He froze. Then his flashlight worked again. And the patterns were gone. The mall's owners filed no formal report. When pressed, they blamed a transformer failure. Canned, however, showed no issues at any substation in the region. No faults. No surges. Their logs from that night list electrical activity as nominal. Which, in utility terms, means, absolutely nothing happened. No explanation was ever given. No repairs were ever needed. And yet, for those 12 seconds, electricity, everywhere in the mall, ceased to exist. And in those 12 seconds, something was hovering overhead. 12 seconds. Long enough for a shape to form above a skylight. Long enough for a janitor's mop water to freeze. Long enough for a dozen witnesses to feel watched. And, it seems, long enough for something to notice us back. The blackout passed. Lights returned. Customers went home. Cleaning crews finished their shifts. But in the security logs for that night, kept in a battered binder with carbon paper slips and initials in ink, you'll find a note scrawled beside the entry for 9:10 p.m. 3 words. Circled in red. Light. Not hours. When you study UFO flaps, when you talk to the experiencers, you learn that it's rarely one big moment. Rarely one ship, one beam of light. No. It starts with a feeling. A flicker. A silence that doesn't sit right. And what happened at Fresno Faire Mall that Tuesday night? That was the first flicker. The first breath held. The first time someone looked up and knew they weren't just under a skylight anymore. They were under observation. In the next chapter, we'll follow what happened in the days after the blackout, strange power surges, lost time incidents, and a cashier whose receipt printer began spitting out numbers that didn't correspond to any item in the system. And didn't stop for 6 hours. The Fresno Faire Mall UFO flap wasn't a one-night event. It was a visitation. One that lingered. One that learned. And one that may not have fully left. This is strAInge. And you're listening to Lights Over Fresno. Chapter 2, 11 Days of Strangeness. You know the kind of strange that sits in your teeth, don't you? Not the fireworks kind. Not a scream in the woods or lights over a cornfield. No, I'm talking about the slow kind. The creeping kind. The kind of strange that drips into your life the way coolant leaks under an old car. You don't see it at first. You just smell something sharp. Metallic. Off. You dismiss it? Until the engine seizes. That's what happened at the Fresno Faire Mall. It didn't explode. It leaked. The blackout on August 12 was the warning. The crack in the glass. What followed were 11 days of increasing weirdness, and no one called it that. Not at first. They called it a glitch. A bug. A wiring thing. But the staff began to murmur. Cleaners began to switch shifts. And managers started marking things down in ledgers not meant for the corporate office. The first to notice a pattern was Kathy Morales, a floor supervisor at B. Dalton Booksellers. Kathy had worked there 5 years. Dependable. By the book. She noticed something strange on August 13, just a day after the lights failed. She opened the store at 9 a.m. and walked to the register to begin counting the float. But the drawer was already open. That wasn't odd. What was odd was the receipt spool. It had printed 13 feet of ticker paper. Every inch of it was blank, except for one phrase, repeated, over and over. 1:23 a.m. She tore the paper, filed a maintenance ticket, and thought nothing more of it, until it happened again the next day. And the next. On August 16, a technician came to inspect the register. He found no signs of tampering, but when he unplugged the machine from the wall, it kept printing. It finally stopped at 1:23 a.m. Across the mall, at a Spencer's Gifts that was already on its way out, 2 employees began hearing clicking from the lava lamp display. Not bubbling. Not gurgling. Clicking. At first, they assumed it was wiring. But when they reached to unplug the base unit, both received a static shock strong enough to knock one of them, Mark Saldana, a college sophomore, off his feet. He described the sound as metal teeth, chewing on a film reel. They closed the store for 2 days. The shocks never returned. Neither did Mark. Then came the time slips. These weren't just anecdotes. There were clock discrepancies. On August 15, a shopper named Leandra Vasquez entered the food court at 1:38 p.m., according to the timestamp on her parking receipt. She walked to the counter at Hot Dog on a Stick, ordered a lemonade, and turned to find the atrium completely empty. Tables abandoned. Trays overturned. No noise. No smell. Just silence. She dropped her cup. By the time she exited the court, panicked and shaken, the parking receipt she'd tucked into her purse, timestamped 1:38, was smeared. Not by condensation, but what she described as ash. When she got home, she discovered her watch had stopped at 1:46 p.m. It wouldn't start again. She still has it. Security footage from that day is missing. Not erased. Not destroyed. The entire VHS rack was found blank, like the cameras had never recorded at all. Mall technicians insisted the system had not been turned off. They blamed it on magnetism. One tech, who asked not to be named, claimed that when he tried to test the security office's monitors, the signal refused to hold. He said, "It's like the mall didn't want to be seen." Children cried more easily. Pets refused to enter the mall through the west entrance. Dogs growled at nothing. One German Shepherd, part of a local K9 patrol, snapped its leash at the south freight door and refused to go inside again. And everywhere, coincidences. Too many to write off. Registers printing in tongues. Light fixtures flickering in sync with the elevator chimes. Customers walking out of stores with items they never picked up, still tagged, but unalarmed. A woman at the Limited claimed she tried on a pair of jeans, but when she looked in the mirror, her reflection wasn't wearing them. It was still looking at her. But she wasn't moving. She screamed. The mirror cracked. The store manager blamed heat stress. But her receipt, when examined later, was blank, except for a string of hexadecimal code. Someone mailed it to MUFON. No reply ever came. And then came the phones. Specifically, payphone number 6, near the fountain, just outside Macy's. It began to ring. Not once. Not twice. But every night, without fail, at 1:23 a.m. The same time stamped on the B. Dalton printer ribbon. It only rang once or twice. Always when no one was near. If you picked it up, there was no voice. Just static. Or, on one occasion, according to a cleaner named Terry Ngo, a sound like breathing underwater. He tried to record it. His cassette melted inside the machine. Literally fused. He still keeps the shell. Just to prove it happened. In total, over a dozen incidents were documented between August 12 and August 23. None made the paper. No police reports were filed. But the mall logs, those little spiral-bound notebooks in the security kiosk, tell a different story. Cryptic entries. Midnight notes. Cold patch, northwest stairwell. Escalator reversed again. Person seen in closed wing. No camera footage. No entry trigger. And one phrase, written in multiple hands over multiple nights, he's still here. The strange wasn't an event. It was a presence. And as August drew to a close, that presence stopped hiding. It revealed itself. For 13 days, it hovered at the edge of understanding. And on the 14th night, it stepped into view. In the next chapter, we'll follow the sightings of the man in the trench coat, a figure glimpsed at least 8 times across multiple locations in the mall. Not security. Not a shopper. And not anyone who ever worked there. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But he always looked up. And sometimes, he waved. Chapter 3, The Man in the Trench Coat. One of the most unnerving aspects of the Fresno Faire Mall flap wasn't the power outage. It wasn't the static on the phones. It wasn't even the lights in the sky. It was him. A figure seen by at least 8 people over a 4-day span. Always indoors. Always near the mezzanine railings or the edge of a food court seating area. Never moving quickly. Never speaking. Never acknowledged by security. No one ever saw him enter the mall. No one ever saw him leave. But they saw him. And they remember. He wasn't scary, not exactly. It was more like he didn't fit. You know when you see an old photo and one person looks too clear? Like the resolution's wrong? That was him. He looked sharper. Like he was cut out of a different picture. The first confirmed sighting occurred on August 18, at 3:43 p.m. A young woman named Melissa Vargas, who worked at Claire's on the 2nd floor, saw the figure standing near the mezzanine across from the arcade. He was wearing a long, gray trench coat. Black slacks. Black shoes. No shopping bags. No name badge. No walkie-talkie. He wasn't a shopper. He wasn't staff. He was just standing there. Looking up. Not at the skylight. At the ceiling tiles. His face was difficult to describe. Not blank. But generic. Melissa described him as having a TV extra face, handsome but unmemorable. The kind of face you forget the second you stop looking. But his eyes? They were wrong. She said they didn't seem to move independently of his head. More like light sensors. Always fixed forward. Always just a little too wide. She tried to wave. She thought maybe he was lost. Or weird. But harmless. He didn't wave back. Instead, he tilted his head, just a few degrees. And then, he smiled. The second sighting came from Jared Lantham, assistant manager at Orange Julius. Jared was closing up around 9:15 p.m. when he noticed someone standing behind the locked glass doors of the Foot Locker across the corridor. The store had closed nearly an hour earlier. He saw the man in the trench coat just standing there, perfectly still. Jared called mall security. By the time they arrived, the figure was gone. Security footage? Missing. That entire wing had gone dark at 9:10 p.m., almost exactly the time the original blackout had occurred 6 days earlier. Over the next 3 days, the man in the trench coat was seen repeatedly. He was always on the 2nd or 3rd floor, always alone, always observing. Never walking. Never eating. Never blinking. He was spotted seated at a food court table after hours. Security found him when making their rounds at 10:15 p.m. When they called out, he reportedly stood slowly. And vanished. Not metaphorically. Literally. He stood up. Walked behind one of the support pillars. And did not come out the other side. Security found no trace. They checked the feed. That tape was blank. By August 22, the mall's internal staff had a nickname for him. The Inspector. Not because he resembled anyone from corporate, but because he looked like he was taking notes. Watching. Evaluating. Measuring something against a checklist no one else could see. In an anonymous interview years later, one assistant manager recalled walking to the restroom on the mezzanine level and seeing the man standing completely still, facing a blank wall. Not browsing. Not waiting. Just facing the wall. For what she estimated was at least 10 minutes. He didn't turn around when she walked by. He didn't turn when she spoke to him. But hours later, when she returned to her locker, she found a note slipped into her uniform pocket. Just 4 words. Nice boots, darling. We still don't know who he was. No security badge matched his appearance. No shoppers claimed him. He wasn't captured on tape, at least, none that survived. Some theorize he was part of the incident. Others say he was the incident. An emissary. A censor. An echo. But if you ask the former employees, those who stayed long enough to see him more than once, they'll tell you something else. He was a message. A sign that someone was watching, and that whatever was happening wasn't just electrical, or psychological, or the result of heat stroke and gossip. It was deliberate. A study. A check-in. Because after the inspector appeared, everything escalated. Registers crashed. Store inventories scrambled. Time slippage became common enough that employees began documenting it on their own. And then, on August 24, at 1:17 a.m., something was seen above the mall's roof. And this time, there were photos. In our next chapter, we turn to a man named Dale Digger Martin, a local ham radio operator who intercepted a transmission that never should have existed. A signal that didn't originate from inside the mall, but landed directly above it. And what happened after that would be enough to catch the attention of people far outside Fresno. This is strAInge. And you're listening to Lights Over Fresno. Every UFO flap, no matter how grounded in physical evidence, eventually turns toward the signal. The uninvited frequency. The broadcast you're not supposed to hear. For the Fresno Faire Mall, that moment came just after midnight on August 21, 1986, 9 days after the blackout, and just 3 nights before something would appear above the roof of Macy's. The signal was picked up not by the military, not by police, but by a hobbyist. A man named Dale Digger Martin. Dale Martin was a ham radio operator. An obsessive. He lived alone in a stucco house on the edge of town near Shields Avenue. A retired bell technician, Dale spent most of his evenings hunched over a table covered in dials and switches, sweeping frequencies that most people never think about. He wasn't looking for aliens. He was looking for patterns. And on the night of August 21, at precisely 12:03 a.m., he got one. Dale was quoted as saying, "I thought it was military at first. Or telemetry. Something bouncing off upper atmosphere junk. But the pulse width was wrong. The spacing too clean. And it looped. Almost like someone was broadcasting deliberately. Not at us, but at something." The signal repeated for exactly 17 minutes. Then it vanished. No fade. No bleed off. Just silence. Dale did what he'd been trained to do. He triangulated the source using 3 rotating antennas and a hand-mapped grid of signal strength. All 3 pointed to the same origin. The rooftop of the Fresno Faire Mall. Specifically, the northeast quadrant, directly above the mall's central atrium and the former location of the KB Toys. Dale drove there that night. He took his tape deck and his rangefinder. What he found was silence. And heat? He parked behind the shuttered Montgomery Ward and approached the building's side access stairwell. The air smelled burned. He described it like plastic melted on a radiator. No lights on the roof. No movement. But when he touched the metal door leading to the upper access panel, he burned his hand. The paint had blistered. And when he returned to his car, the cassette deck, still recording, was empty. Not paused. Not stopped. Empty. The tape inside had melted. Dale wasn't the only one who heard it. 3 other ham operators in the Central Valley picked up fragments. One of them, in Bakersfield, said it sounded like a sonar ping being pushed through an oscilloscope backwards. Another, in Visalia, heard it as musical, a sequence of notes that repeated with mathematical precision. But when any of them attempted to play back their recordings, something happened. Equipment failed. Playback was distorted. 2 tapes snapped outright. One operator claimed that when he tried to digitize the sample, his computer's hard drive erased itself entirely, and only that file directory. The rest of the drive remained intact. Only the waveform vanished. That might have been the end of it. Except Dale made an analog copy. He mailed it to a friend at a community college in Santa Barbara, an electrical engineering professor named Dr. Curtis Navrotsky, who ran a summer program for undergrad signal researchers. That envelope was logged at the Clovis post office on August 22. When Dr. Navrotsky was contacted months later by another researcher trying to piece together this incident, he claimed he never received it. But, and here's the part that matters, he remembered the name. Because 2 weeks after the envelope was mailed, 2 men showed up on his campus asking if he had any unusual transmissions on file. They had no university affiliation. They offered no credentials. They showed him a printed diagram of the Fresno Faire Mall from 1979. Dale Martin disappeared from the public record in 1988. His house was sold. His equipment auctioned. The only thing recovered from his effects was a folder labeled Fresno, 86. Inside was a single, heavily degraded Polaroid. It showed a section of rooftop ductwork. Blurry. Overexposed. But in the upper right corner, barely visible, washed in orange light, was something. A curve, metallic, almost like the edge of a lens or dome. No timestamp. No witness statement. Just one line written on the back in Dale's neat block lettering. They're not broadcasting. They're listening. By this point, the mall had developed a new kind of silence. Not just the kind that happens after hours. The kind that feels watched. Lifeguards speak of a dead water moment when no one's swimming, no one's talking, and yet the pool feels like it's holding its breath. That was the mall. A breath being held. The lights didn't fail again. But the temperature dropped near the skylight every night. The payphone kept ringing. And then, in the early hours of August 24, something rose above the roof of Macy's. And for once, someone saw it. And they had a camera. You don't always need words to deliver a message. Sometimes, light is enough. Chapter 5, The Object Above Macy's. By the end of the 3rd week of August 1986, the atmosphere inside the Fresno Faire Mall had curdled. The reports of static, time slips, the man in the trench coat, and the signal intercepted from the rooftop had not been shared publicly. There were no newspaper articles. No official briefings. No press. But those who worked the late shifts had begun to feel it. That sense of build-up. As if something was waiting to arrive. Or worse, already here. The mall's night crew was thinner than usual on the evening of August 23. A few had called in sick. Others quietly swapped shifts. Security detail had been reduced to 1 man on rotation. That man was Frank Dillman, 43 years old, former Army Reserve, and a fixture at the mall since its expansion in 1982. Quiet. Reliable. Known for drinking a single cup of diner coffee before every overnight shift. At exactly 1:17 a.m., while on his second patrol of the exterior perimeter, Frank paused for a cigarette behind the loading dock at Macy's. That's when he looked up. And saw it. According to Frank's written statement, obtained in 1993 through a former mall manager's personal file, The object appeared directly above the east roofline of Macy's. He described it as a van-sized craft, hovering silently. Not a plane. Not a helicopter. No noise. No rotor wash. Just a presence. The object emitted a soft, dull orange light. Not a beam. A glow. As if the metal itself was heated, but not radiating heat. He described it as like molten glass, but breathing. Frank stared for what he believed was less than a minute. The object did not spin. It did not shift. It simply hung in place, 10 to 15 feet above the roofline. And then it blinked. Not with lights. Not like navigation strobes. The entire craft blinked, momentarily becoming brighter, sharper, and then vanishing in a sudden upward zip. Gone. Without a sound. Frank said, "It wasn't scary. That's the part that gets people. I wasn't afraid. I felt observed. But not threatened. Like something was clocking us. Like it had a clipboard. I don't know. Like it was collecting data." Frank had a Polaroid camera on his belt. He used it occasionally to document damage, graffiti, license plates. He raised it during the sighting and took 2 photos. Only one developed. The second came out black. The surviving photo, according to mall logs, was stored in a standard issue manila folder and handed to the night manager, a man named Tony Reza, the following morning. That folder vanished before the end of the week. It was never entered into the company's official incident report ledger. The manager who received it? Tony was transferred to a different facility the next month and, after 1987, disappears from all corporate records. No forwarding address. No tax trail. Nothing. And Frank? He stayed on for 3 more years. But he never patrolled the Macy's side again. He requested a permanent reassignment to the lower atrium. In an interview conducted in 1995 for an independent documentary that was never completed, Frank shared one more detail that wasn't in his original report. "After it blinked out, I stayed out there. Don't know why. Something told me to. Just this pressure behind the eyes, you know? So I walked up to the loading ramp. Thought maybe it left something. Some mark. A burn. But all I found was this smell. Like burnt marshmallows." The scent would be reported 2 more times in the following week by mall staff. Always near the east wall. Always after hours. Never explained. By September 1st, the reports had stopped. The phones no longer rang at 1:23 a.m. The escalators resumed normal function. The registers returned to their normal gibberish. It was as if the mall had exhaled. Whatever had happened, it was over. But the memory remained. So did the strange architectural anomalies discovered in later years, hidden crawlspaces, blocked ducts that led nowhere, and a metal plate embedded in the northeast rooftop, flawless, cold to the touch, and impossible to lift. And still, every now and then, people report a light. A soft glow. Above Macy's. Just at the edge of vision. Gone before you can point to it. Next time on strAInge, Lights Over Fresno, we examine the long tail of the incident. The lingering effects. The surveillance. The cover-up. And the growing belief among former employees that the Fresno Faire Mall was never just a mall. Because the most unsettling part isn't that something came. It's that something stayed. The flap ended in silence. No final sighting. No mass panic. Just normal again. That's what makes the Fresno Faire Mall case so disturbing. There was no climax. No disclosure. No reckoning. It simply went quiet. And it's in that silence that the real story survives. Because in the absence of further sightings, something else remained. A residue. A pressure. A change that outlived the object above Macy's and the signal no one could trace. What lingered was not evidence, but behavior. Starting in October 1986, just a month after the incident, at least 6 employees from the Fresno Faire Mall left their jobs with no explanation. Some transferred. Some vanished from payroll altogether. One janitor left a short resignation note, written in pencil on the back of a frozen yogurt receipt. It read, "It's still up there. I don't know how. But I won't clean beneath it anymore." That receipt was recovered in 1994 by a local researcher digging through unfiled HR documents during a redevelopment survey. Its authenticity was never challenged. The handwriting matches payroll forms. The manager who signed off on the resignation? Can't be found. No forwarding number. No new employment. Nothing. Visitors to the abandoned parts of the mall in the early 2000s, after the third-floor wing was shuttered, reported strange acoustics. Whispers that didn't belong to echo. Mall rats, graffiti taggers, thrill seekers, they said the building had a hum to it. Not electrical. More like a drone, low and constant. If you held your breath, you could feel it in your sinuses. A subtle vibration. Some said it was just pressure from the old vents. But those vents had been decommissioned. And still, the hum remained. And then there were the cover-ups. Or if not cover-ups, then, absences. Entire segments of the mall's internal incident reports from August 1986 are missing. Not redacted. Not damaged. Simply not there. A mall that kept everything, receipts for bulb replacements, time-stamped logs of hourly patrols, memos about chewing gum on carpet, had a 12-day blank. Digital backups? Blank. Photocopies? Gone. It's as though someone erased the memory of that month from inside the file cabinet. And yet, even today, if you speak to the few who were there, if you get them to really open up, they'll tell you in careful tones, without hyperbole, without excitement. Something was in that mall. It came in August of '86. And it wasn't just passing through. In 2014, a paranormal investigation team briefly accessed the northeast rooftop through a subcontractor tied to a demolition project. Their findings were never released formally. But one of their team members, a man who called himself Jasper online, posted fragments of what they found on an archived message board. Among them, a photograph of an unregistered metal panel bolted directly into the concrete, stamped with no manufacturer ID. A partial recording of white noise intercut with what sounds, briefly, like a voice speaking backwards. And a handwritten note, found tucked behind a roof vent. It read, "They don't need doors. They remember shapes." The thread was deleted less than a week later. Jasper hasn't posted since. The Fresno Faire Mall still stands. At least part of it. The East Wing is a flea market now. The old arcade is a dialysis center. The atrium fountain is long gone, filled in with concrete. But the roof is still there. And the panel is still embedded. I've seen it. Cold to the touch. Utterly seamless. Like it was pressed into the structure from above. Not installed. Just placed. You can visit if you want. Plenty of people do. Some claim nothing's there. Others say they feel a headache standing beneath the skylight. A few take photos that blur in strange ways. And every so often, around closing time, a shopper, usually alone, usually on their way out, swears they saw someone on the second floor. Tall. Still. In a trench coat. Looking up. The Fresno Faire Mall UFO Flap of 1986 never made the news. No Freedom of Information request ever turned up a thing. But ask the right janitor. The right cashier. The right graveyard shift guard. And they'll tell you the same thing. Something happened in August. And it never entirely stopped. You just don't notice it anymore. Because malls are good at hiding ghosts. Even the ones that glow. This has been strAInge. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and stay strAInge.